In the hushed confines of Alexandria's antique library, Amina sifted through dusty pages and faded ink, driven by a curiosity to uncover the truth about her family's past. The scent of aged parchment occupied the air as she looked into the archives, seeking the elusive ties that connected her to her great-great-grandmother named Leila. As she turned the pages, Amina discovered the hidden story of Leila's life, a journey marked by resilience and aspirations. The record spoke of a woman who defied societal norms, carving a path in dark parts of a city that rarely acknowledged the dreams of those who were way ahead of their time. The silence was deafening as Amina stumbled upon the speculated details of Leila's mysterious end. Some thought a random assailant had taken her life or one of her clients, but many pointed at Sakina and Raya, sisters who owned the brothel where Leila worked. Yet, amid the uncertainty, it is recorded that Leila had accumulated a lot of earnings over her 4 years in the city's quarters. Her savings would see that she left the confines of the city back to country where her mother was raising her daughter. The money she'd saved was enough to build them a simple yet comfortable life. As Amina pieced together the fragments of this familial story, Leila's legacy unfolded through time, extending beyond the realm of tragedy into a tale of strength. In the quiet corners of the library, surrounded by the history of her ancestors' past and many others, Amina felt a sense of peace. With each revelation, she drew closer to the truth that lay in the history books, a truth that would reveal the untold legacy of a woman who, against all odds, had dreamt of a life beyond the city. Habari Marafiki, my name is Jackie and welcome back to the African Crime Files. Today we delve into the story of two sisters, Raya and Sakina, Egypt's first documented female serial killers. The sisters are frequently shown in a very comedic frame in popular culture and are the immediate go-to reference for female serial killers in Egypt. They were surrounded by a group of accomplices who included their husbands and 2 other men, yet were still are depicted as the main culprits. This was probably because of their active roles in the murders. Or maybe the need to hype up the story. The media can tend to focus on specific individuals for dramatic effect. Many, including myself, would be more inclined to read an article titled First Female Serial Killers and not 6 accused in a murder for profit scheme. That just sounds so beige. I do have to stress what Raya and Sakina did was despicable. However, it is important to acknowledge the full context, including the involvement of their male accomplices, to provide a more accurate representation of the events and the roles played by all parties involved. Media portrayals can sometimes oversimplify complex cases, leading to a skewed narrative. And unfortunately, my story today is skewed too, as it's these stories that I use to do my research on the case. So please remember, although all 6 perpetrators are responsible for these vile acts, information available is all centered around the 2 sisters. Our story begins in 1920. Alexandria was a city balancing tradition and change. The streets bustled with activity as people navigated the marketplaces filled with goods and the smell of spices. The city's architecture, influenced by Greco-Roman and Islamic styles, reflected its diverse heritage. The port facilitated trade and economic activities connecting Alexandria to the global market. The city's population comprised various ethnic groups, contributing to its cosmopolitan vibe. Social life thrived in cafes, theaters, and markets, offering spaces for people to gather and engage in cultural activities. The aftermath of World War I and growing nationalist views influenced the political landscape. British influence persisted, but discussions and activism marked the city's social and political scenes. Transportation, including trams and trains, contributed to Alexandria's accessibility. The city's daily life echoed the rhythms of a changing era, encapsulated by its vibrant streets and diverse population. And it is here on November 15th, 1920, where an elderly man reported a shocking discovery to his local police station. While installing a new sewage system in an apartment building managed by his family, he dug up the skeleton of a woman. Less than a month later, on the morning of the 11th December 1920, a passerby discovered human remains on the side of the road. The body was damaged beyond recognition and completely dismembered. There was also a piece of black cloth and a striped black and white pair of socks near the body. However, these items did not help with the identification of the remains. The discovery was later connected with two of the most infamous characters of Egyptian popular culture, Raya and Sakina. Both were the first women to receive the death penalty under the modern Egyptian judicial system. Theirs is a story of a series of homicides that caused panic in Alexandria in the early 20th century under British colonial rule. The murders started in 1919 and ended in 1921 with a total of 17 bodies buried underneath two of Raya and Sakina's rental homes. Raya, Sakina, their husbands, and two other men were convicted for the murders and sentenced to death on 16th May 1921. Raya and Sakina became the first women to be executed by the modern state of Egypt. Their story began in the southern Egyptian city of Aswan, where Ali Haman and his wife Zainab had a daughter in 1875 who they named Raya. Ali Hammam died suddenly and his pregnant wife took Raya and left for a province in the Nile Delta between Dominta and Alexandria, where she gave birth to her second child, Sakina. After some years of struggle, Zainab married off her oldest daughter, Raya. Shortly after, Raya got pregnant, but history repeated itself and like her mother, her husband passed away. As was the custom amongst Egyptian villages at the time, her dead husband's younger brother, 10 years younger than Raya, offered to marry her to help raise his brother's child. Hasabala was his name, and he left his job as a security guard and joined his wife Raya, where he got another job in the cotton industry. The child that was the reason for their marriage died less than a year after they got married. But they continued their marriage and got 5 children of their own, but only one survived, their daughter Bedia. Sakina also got married and had a daughter she called Zainab after her mother. The baby died as well shortly after birth. As a result, Sakina and her husband divorced 2 years later and Sakina moved alone to Alexandria. The level of tragedy that followed this family. Guy, I know this was common at the time and people found ways to cope with survival being the focus, but it must still have been so heartbreaking and traumatic. With Sakina in Alexandria, Hasabala, Raya's husband, soon discovered that the cotton business didn't bring in enough money to feed his family. So he, his wife, and his daughter joined Sakina in Alexandria in hope of better opportunities. The cotton business crash was a result of the Egyptian economy's crash due to World War I, and the informal economy emerged, allowing Egypt's poor to earn money through unconventional jobs. So the couple and Sakina started a business that would prove to be very lucrative, a brothel. Each one of them had their role in running the brothel and recruiting sex workers and male customers. Their first brothel was established near the British Army base, attracting a large clientele of British soldiers along with local businessmen and married men. They eventually opened more than one brothel in different parts of Alexandria to meet the demand of the rising number of patrons. In their early years in Alexandria, they started out renting rooms second-handedly. By this I mean the dealers would rent a flat and then rent out rooms to a third party. They were forced to rent rooms in this way through dealers, as they had all been arrested for petty theft, which meant no contract could be obtained in their name. This situation resulted in them having to move around a lot, something undesirable when running a business. In one of these temporary locations, Sakina found the love of her life, a neighbor called Mohammed Abdel Al. They got married, and now the four of them, together with two other men, Mr. Orabi and Mr. Al Abdel El Rez, began building up the business. The business did really well, and the group decided to rent an entire house that they called the House of Beauty, in which the first floor was dedicated to gatherings. In the middle was a bar and a place for smoking, amongst other things. And there was also hashish, which is smoked from special long Arabic water pipes. It's extremely stylish. The second floor was a brothel exclusively prepared for the guests and the sex workers, with food service including many fancy and expensive dishes. Until here, the story of the sisters is very similar. However, what follows has caused a lot of debate and disagreements amongst Egyptians. The first and oldest story describes Raya and Sakina as opportunists. Despite the outward appearance of success, they were struggling financially and found a way to compensate for their business losses. They started visiting the local market regularly, where they picked up some of their victims. They were always wealthy, well-dressed women wearing a lot of gold. Perhaps the victim stopped by a shop selling fabrics, and as she was choosing which one to buy, Sakina or Raya would approach and tell her,
"We have better quality fabric and a greater selection at our place. If you want, you can accompany us and have a look."
Something along those lines. Once at their place, the men would strangle her and collect the gold before burying her underground. They would sell the stolen jewelry to a local jeweler, Ali Hassan, and divided the money amongst each other. A few months later, a policeman discovered a body in the streets of Alexandria, near the neighborhood where the two couples lived. Around the same time, the owner of one of the flats Sakina had previously rented got an offer to rent out the entire apartment complex to a wealthy Italian man. But the man requested to have the water pipes changed, as they were very old. While putting in the new pipes, the workers found the remains of a body that was later linked to the room Sakina rented. The neighbors also complained to the police about a strong and strange smell and excessive incense smoke originating from Sakina's room that used to fill the hallways. As the net tightened, the police discovered more and more and more bodies, a total of 17 victims. The 6 criminals were Raya and her husband Hassan Allah, Sakina and her husband Mohammed Abdelal, in addition to 2 other men, Orabi Hassan and Abdel Razik Youssef. Between 20th December 1919 and 12th November 1920, they murdered 17 women. In addition to the victims they found at the market, they also murdered some of the sex workers who used to work in the brothel that was managed by Raya and Sakina. Most of the victims knew Raya and Sakina and had been friends with them for years. After luring a victim to one of the 4 homes, they would offer her wine until she became inebriated. The 4 men would then attack the victim and constrain her. One would hold her ankles, one would surround her chest with his arms, and a third would hold her tightly while the 4 suffocated her by forcibly placing a wet cloth on her mouth and nose until she stopped breathing. They would then steal her jewelry, her money, her clothes, and afterwards the men would remove the tiles of the floor, dig a hole, bury the corpse in it, and reset the tiles. The news went viral and the case became widely known because it involved 2 women as the main participants in a serial killing, something incomprehensible at the time. The legal system at the time was swift, and less than a few weeks after their arrest, all 6 of them got the death penalty. The second story is much more recent and dates back less than 10 years ago when the Egyptian writer Ahmed Ashur reinvestigated the case in connection with a new film he was about to make about Raya and Sakina. What he discovered revealed a completely different picture of the 2 sisters and their intentions. In 1953, 31 years after the death sentences were carried out, the chief inspector responsible for the case revealed in a conference that the 2 women were not upset nor afraid of the death sentence, proof of a clean conscience and morally pure intentions, according to him, or trauma or psychopathy, according to mine. But after looking into it further, during this time period in Egyptian history, a lot of uprisings, demonstrations, and resistance to foreign occupation took place. And the British, who were tired of the unrest, wanted people to stay quiet. In an attempt to cool the situation down, they were said to have made up the story both to get rid of Rya and Sakina, who may have been part of the 1919 revolution, and in turn scare the Egyptian public to stay at home out of fear. They achieved some degree of success because the revolution failed and their leader was exiled in Crete. Later, when rumors spread, citizens unknowingly blew the situation out of proportion, and this is how the first story spread. It is said that when the 2 women were first brought in for questioning, the Egyptian chief inspector soon discovered their innocence but was swiftly removed from his post, and a new chief, who wanted the case closed and solved, replaced him. Bedia, Raya's daughter, was asked as a witness in the case, but was tricked into thinking that if she said what they told her to say, her mother and father would be freed. In spite of the false promises, after Bedia's testimony, the group was sentenced to death and executed in 1921. Bedia was then brought to an orphanage, a place that was conveniently burned down shortly after, with everything and everyone inside it, including Bedia, to allegedly avoid loose ends. This second theory also speculated that the resistance against foreign occupation used the brothel and all the information that passed through its walls as a focal point of intelligence and center of resistance to fight the British occupation. And the first story was all false accusations, tampering with evidence and casting aspersions without any base on reality whatsoever. According to recent investigations, the 2 women were innocent, and with all loose ends gone, what remained was the British forces' story, the Egyptian police's weak accounts, and some random charges that were never really backed up by evidence. There were also the frightened people of Alexandria who were scared for their own lives and thus could be tricked to say almost anything. They unknowingly spread false rumors around the city and the rest of the country. Raya and Sakina's only crimes were firstly running a brothel, something that was and still is improper in Egypt, but was at the time legal, and they had all the permits they needed, thus it was not a crime according to the law. In the time before Raya and Sakina, women were not sentenced to death in Egypt under the new legal system. But this was changed to fit the situation in Raya and Sakina's case to be able to sentence them to death. So the question remains, were they national freedom fighters, heroines who fought for their country, or were they ruthless serial killers strangling women for their gold? Personally, I think it's the latter. I do think they lured several women to their death. I do believe the story was sensationalized, and I feel bad for using the word sensationalized when people lose their lives, but I mean it in reference to dubbing Raya and Sakina serial killers. They were crimes for profit, and they were not the main perpetrators. Would I call the sisters serial killers? No. Accomplices, accessories to murder, manipulative opportunists who were as bad as the actual killers? Yes. I think if the second story were true, more people would have known about it. more people in the resistance would have opened up about the sisters' role. I want so badly to believe the second story, but my skepticism draws me more to the first. I am not huge on conspiracy theories, and the second story feels like just that. Maybe there is some truth to both stories, and the sisters were opportunistic, disloyal, murderous women who valued wealth, but at the same time wanted the British out of their home. Both truths can exist together. I am curious to know what you all think. Let me know in the comments below. And I'll end there, Marafiki. If you're keen to explore more about crime in my home continent, Africa, please subscribe to my channel. Together we can shed light on important issues and work towards a safer and more equitable society. Until next week, stay safe and let's work together to make positive changes no matter how small in the world around us. Kwaheri.